Hello, I'm Phantom Mitchell, and today we're diving into one of the most perplexing and chilling cases of all time, the perfect crime, the murders of Charles and Betty Cottrell. A crime with no clear motive, no solid suspects, and an eerie sense that something was being covered up. How can two people vanish from their home only to be found brutally murdered under bizarre circumstances? And why do the clues lead to more questions than answers? Buckle up, because this case will haunt you. On the evening of June 12, 1980, Charles and Betty Cottrell were enjoying a peaceful night at their home in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. They were well known in the community. Charles, a retired engineer, and Betty, a devoted grandmother. There was nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of distress. But something sinister lurked in the shadows. Neighbors later reported hearing a strange noise around 10 p.m., something between a muffled scream and a heavy thud, but no one thought much of it. The next morning, the Cottrells' home was eerily silent. The newspaper lay untouched on the driveway, and no one had seen them leave. What happened behind those closed doors that night? When a family friend, concerned about the couple's unusual silence, arrived at their home, an unsettling scene awaited. The front door was locked, but a back window was slightly ajar. Upon stepping inside, the air was thick with an unexplainable tension. The living room was untouched, no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle. But when they entered the bedroom, a horrifying sight awaited. Charles and Betty were lying side by side on the bed, both dead. The strangest part, there was no visible blood. No gunshot wounds, no stab marks. It was as if they had simply stopped existing. One of the most baffling details of the crime scene was the complete lack of forced entry. Every door was locked from the inside, and the windows were secured. The only oddity was that single back window barely open, not enough for an adult to climb through. Police initially suspected carbon monoxide poisoning, but the autopsy ruled it out. Their cause of death, unknown. There were no toxins, no blunt force trauma, no suffocation. It was as if something or someone had killed them without leaving a trace. As investigators scoured the Cottrells' home, more bizarre details emerged. Their wallets and valuables remained untouched. This was no robbery. The house was meticulously clean, almost unnaturally so. Even the bed where their bodies lay was neatly made, as if someone had carefully placed them there after death. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds. It was as if they had willingly gone to sleep and never woken up. But the strangest part, their facial expressions. Both Charles and Betty had looks of frozen terror, eyes wide open, mouths slightly agape. What had they seen in their final moments? A deeper examination of the crime scene revealed something chilling. Charles and Betty had died at least 12 hours before their bodies were discovered. But neighbors swore they had seen the couple alive the following morning. A local mailman even claimed Betty had waved to him from the front porch around 9 a.m. If the autopsy was correct, she was already dead by then. Who or what had the mailman actually seen? And why did security footage from a nearby gas station capture what appeared to be Charles's car pulling out of the driveway several hours after his estimated time of death? Detectives found only one set of footprints leading away from the house, disappearing into a wooded area behind the property. But here's where it gets weird. There were no return footprints. Whoever had left that house never came back. Stranger still, the tracks stopped abruptly in the middle of an open clearing, as if the person had simply vanished into thin air. Bloodhounds brought to the scene became agitated, circling the area before refusing to continue. What had disturbed them, and why did the air in that spot feel unnaturally cold, despite the summer heat? Investigators soon discovered that Betty had called 911 the night before their deaths, but the call had been mysteriously cut off after only 7 seconds. When traced, the recording revealed only heavy breathing and a faint, barely audible whisper, "It's already inside." Dispatchers attempted to call back, but the lion had gone dead. Why hadn't officers been sent to check on them that night? And what or who had already been inside their home? While processing the crime scene, forensic teams discovered a barely visible message scrawled on the bathroom mirror in condensation, as if someone had written it with their finger, thus before the steam faded away. The chilling words, "I told you not to look." Who had written it? And what exactly had the Cottrells seen that sealed their fate? While combing through the house, detectives made a shocking discovery: a hidden surveillance camera tucked behind a bookshelf in the living room. It wasn't police equipment, nor did it belong to the Cottrells. Stranger still, the camera was still recording when found, but the SD card inside was missing. Who had placed it there? What had it captured? The tech team managed to recover one corrupted video file from the device's internal storage. The footage was brief, just a few seconds, but what it showed was horrifying. At precisely 3:17 a.m., Charles and Betty were sitting rigidly on the couch, their faces pale and expressionless. Then, all at once, they turned their heads towards something off camera in perfect unison. The screen went black. No audio, no explanation. Whatever they saw that night, it was never meant to be known. Forensics dusted the house for prints, expecting to find only the couple's own. Instead, they uncovered several unknown sets, but here's where things got disturbing. The prints belonged to no one in the national database. Even more unsettling, some of the prints were too elongated, almost inhuman, with finger proportions that didn't match any known individual. Experts suggested they could be distorted due to the surface they were found on, but one forensic analyst wasn't so sure. "These aren't normal," he muttered under his breath, staring at the evidence. But if these fingerprints weren't human, then what kind of entity had left them behind? A neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, came forward with an eerie account. Around 3:30 a.m. on the night of the murders, she had woken up to the sound of knocking, but not at her own door. Through the curtains, she saw a figure standing outside the Cottrells' house, drenched in rain, staring up at their bedroom window. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and stood completely motionless. Just as she was about to call the police, it turned its head directly toward her, despite being nearly half a block away. "It knew I was watching," she whispered. When she blinked, the figure was gone. The next morning, Charles and Betty were dead. Had she seen their killer, or was it something much worse? One of the biggest anomalies in the case was Charles's car. The vehicle had been parked in the driveway the night before, but when police arrived, it was gone. Even stranger, neighbors reported seeing it driving away at 6 a.m. hours after the Cottrells were confirmed dead. Traffic cameras later picked it up entering an abandoned lot on the edge of town, but there were no further sightings. The car was eventually found 2 weeks later, deep in the woods, with the doors locked from the inside. The engine was still warm, but the interior was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if it had been sitting for decades. Who had driven it, and why had it been abandoned in such a remote place? Charles was known for keeping a detailed personal journal, documenting his daily activities and thoughts. But when police retrieved it from his nightstand, something was wrong. Every entry for the past 6 months had been ripped out. The last remaining entry, dated nearly a year before his death, contained an unsettling note: "If anything happens to me, check the basement." But here's the thing, the Cottrells didn't have a basement. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Determined to follow the cryptic journal entry, investigators thoroughly searched the property. What they found sent shivers down their spines. Beneath the floorboards in the study, hidden beneath an antique rug, they discovered a trapdoor. It led to a narrow stone staircase, descending into a hidden underground chamber. The air was thick, damp, and unnaturally cold. At the center of the room was an old wooden chair, its arms bound with frayed rope. Surrounding it were dozens of candles, long melted down to nothing. And on the farthest wall, carved deep into the stone, was a single word: forgive. What had the Cottrells been hiding? As forensic teams documented the hidden room, one officer swore he saw something move in the corner, but when he turned, nothing was there. A few minutes later, another investigator noticed shadows on the wall that didn't match their movements, as if something else was standing among them. Several officers refused to go back down after that. One even requested to be removed from the case entirely, muttering, "There's something down there, and it doesn't want us here." During the investigation, police uncovered an old cassette recorder in the hidden chamber. The tape inside was labeled 11:03 p.m., the approximate time Charles and Betty were believed to have died. When played, the recording was nearly silent, just faint static until exactly the 11:03 minute mark. That's when it started, a low, distorted voice, unintelligible at first, but slowly forming words. It was always watching. The last sound was a shrill, ear-piercing scream, cut off abruptly. The room fell silent. The tape had been untouched for decades, the recorder covered in dust. So how had it captured a sound from the night of the murders? In the hidden room, buried beneath a pile of old furniture, detectives discovered a black leather-bound book. The pages were brittle, covered in strange, handwritten symbols that no one could decipher. But the most disturbing part: several pages contained detailed sketches of a tall, faceless figure with elongated fingers and hollow eyes. The same figure that Mrs. Holloway claimed she had seen outside the Cottrells' house. Some drawings showed the entity standing at the foot of a bed. In others, it was watching from a dark corner. The final page was different. It contained only 3 words, written in shaking handwriting: "Do not speak." After discovering the book, investigators noticed something even more unsettling. The temperature in the hidden chamber began to drop rapidly. Several officers reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, their breath visible in the icy air. The room's thermometer, previously reading a stable 68 degrees Fahrenheit, suddenly plummeted to 42 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of seconds. Then, the power in the house flickered violently, and for a brief moment, all sound ceased completely. No footsteps, no breathing, no ambient noise. Then, just as quickly, everything returned to normal. But one officer swore he'd heard something in that unnatural silence, a deep, slow inhale, right behind him. A week after the discovery of the hidden chamber, Mrs. Holloway, the neighbor who had seen the strange figure outside, went missing. Her front door was wide open, lights still on, dinner half-eaten on the table. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry. Her purse, keys, and phone were all untouched. The only clue: a single handprint on her bedroom mirror, elongated fingers, just like the ones found at the Cottrells' house. The media barely covered her disappearance. It was almost as if no one wanted to acknowledge that this case wasn't over. A retired journalist named Alan Graves reached out to authorities, claiming he had information about the Cottrells. He had been investigating a series of similar deaths dating back decades, all with the same eerie details: no forced entry, no clear cause of death, no logical explanation. But before detectives could meet with him, Alan was found dead in his apartment. The official cause: sudden heart failure. But his final email, sent just hours before, contained one chilling line: "I found the pattern, but it's watching me now." Alan Graves' notes, recovered from his apartment, revealed a disturbing pattern. Every case he had investigated traced back to one specific location, an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The Cottrells had purchased their home only months after visiting that very place. Coincidence? Detectives didn't think so. When they arrived at the farmhouse, it was clear no one had lived there for decades. Yet, the dust-covered floor showed fresh footprints leading inside. No prints leading out. Something or someone was still in there. Inside the farmhouse, police found a single locked door at the end of a long, narrow hallway. The wood was splintered, old, yet ice-cold to the touch. When they finally forced it open, they were met with an impossible sight: a room that was a perfect replica of the Cottrells' living room. Same furniture, same decor, even the same family photos, only the faces had been scratched out. On the coffee table sat a single VHS tape, unlabeled. But when they played it, their blood ran cold. It was footage from inside the Cottrells' house, taken the night of their deaths. The angle, from the ceiling, like something had been watching them from above. After viewing the tape, detectives reported an overwhelming sense of paranoia. Some claimed to see shadows moving in their peripheral vision. Others described a feeling of being watched, followed. The lead investigator, Detective Harper, reviewed the footage one last time. That's when she saw it. In the final frame of the video, just before the screen cut to static, two faint, glowing eyes appeared in the darkness above the Cottrells' couch. It had been there all along, watching, waiting. Digging into old records, detectives uncovered something truly horrifying. Over the past century, at least 20 families had died under eerily similar circumstances after moving into the Cottrells' neighborhood. The cases were never connected because the deaths always appeared natural or unexplained. But in every single case, there were whispers of the same thing: a shadowy figure, strange whispers at night, and the overwhelming sense that something was watching from the corners of their home. The town had known, and yet no one ever spoke about it. Only one person had ever survived an encounter with whatever haunted the Cottrells, a woman named Lillian Parks, who, in 1978, fled town overnight after her husband and 2 children died in their sleep under identical circumstances. Police tracked her down to a remote cabin, hoping for answers. But when they arrived, she was nowhere to be found. The only thing left behind was a single note, nailed to the door. It read, "It doesn't let you leave. Run while you can." As detectives pieced together the case, something even more terrifying happened. One of their own disappeared. Officer Daniels, who had been assigned to guard the Cottrells' house, vanished without a trace during his shift. His squad car was still running, radio crackling with static. The security cameras in the area recorded nothing unusual until 3:17 a.m., when the footage glitched for exactly 7 seconds. When it returned, Daniels was gone, the last transmission from his radio. A single whispered word: "Run." Authorities ordered a final sweep of the Cottrells' house before closing the case for good. That's when they found one last piece of evidence: a hidden audio recorder under the couple's bed. It had been running for weeks, set to automatically capture sounds at night. Most of the files were normal occasional creaks, distant voices from the television. But on the night of the murders, there was a chilling 3-minute recording. It started with silence. Then came the sound of bare footsteps moving unnaturally fast. Charles whispered, barely audible, "It's here." Then, a low growl. And finally the sound of breathing, right next to the microphone. The tape ended. With no logical explanation for the events surrounding the Cottrells' deaths, authorities quietly closed the case, ruling it as unsolved but non-suspicious. Reports vanished, evidence went missing, and soon, the case faded into obscurity. But those who worked the investigation knew the truth. Something unnatural had been in that house, and it was still out there. Despite its horrifying past, the Cottrells' house didn't stay abandoned for long. Within a year, a new family moved in. Locals tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. They dismissed the rumors as urban legends. That is, until strange things started happening again. The new owners reported hearing whispers in the walls, seeing figures in the corners of their vision. Their 5-year-old daughter began talking to an invisible friend one she called the tall man. And then, one night, she whispered to her mother, "He's watching from the ceiling again." To this day, The Cottrell's case remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries. No arrests, no explanations, just whispers and fear. The house still stands, but no one dares to stay there for long, and those who ask too many questions tend to disappear. Maybe it's just a coincidence, or maybe some crimes are never meant to be solved. Do you believe in perfect crimes, or do you believe that some things are beyond our understanding? If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.